Hey guys, Bicebump here, bringing you the first of hopefully many Death Knight videos on the 11.1 patch. This will be a general patch overview where we talk about the changes, the DPS increase, as well as predictions in how powerful will be in the next patch. Hopefully you will watch this video and you go, okay, I want to play Frost DKs, they look powerful, you know, that's going to be nice, or potentially Unholy DK. That is essentially the target goal here. Anyway, we have lots of changes to talk through. I've discussed these in previous videos, but just to go through them again, talk about the impact and so on. I got them up here. Starting out with both Frost and Unholy, we see some defensive nerfs. Both Veteran of the Third War, Null Magic, and Permafrost also quite significant nerfs. I personally think this is fine. We are still incredibly tanky. It's just that previously we were ridiculously tanky, and now we're brought it in line a little bit. We are definitely amongst the most tanky classes, and I don't expect this to change very much. Things like Will of the Necropolis hasn't changed at all, and that's a really, really powerful defensive spell. So sure, we saw defensive nerfs. They were fine, they were justified, and it's not, you know, doom because of it. For Frost specifically, we have some damage buffs. First of all, we saw an all ability damage increase by 5%. Just a small buff to kind of help us, because I think we were underperforming a little bit, at least in raid testing in the new patch. Furthermore, we have Obliterate damage increased by 20%, Frost Strike damage increased by 15%, Rhyme has been buffed to 275%, up from 225%, and finally Breath increased by 10%. All of these, in conjunction, is around 11% total DPS increase. It varies slightly with builds. You can see that Breath was buffed a little bit less than things like Frost Strike and Obliterate. This means that builds that run Shattering Blade, for instance, were buffed ever so slightly more than builds that run only Breath of Syndragosa. In conjunction with the tier set being quite targeted towards Frost Strike damage, this means that our Shattering Blade build is the highest single target build once you get the full 4 set. I still expect us to see lots of Breath. It is really good at cleave, and until you get like the proper gear, you won't do more damage with the Shattering Blade anyway. So it's probably going to be a mix, and depending on the fight. That's the prediction there at least. Finally, we saw a Glacier Advance update to the visual. It's quite nice to have something new. I'm not sure whether you guys like it or not. I'm kind of impartial, I don't really care. Anyway, overall, how powerful is Frost going to be? I think 11% buff is obviously really nice. We are at the bottom of the damage meters when you're looking at the previous patch. If you're looking at the just the damage from today and yesterday, essentially everyone who's run the raid, Frost has essentially gone from the bottom up to somewhere in the middle. However, we also need to consider gear, because we are still running with old gear. Right, how's the new tier set looking? Are there any special weapons, any trinkets that is going to help us or disadvantage us? Tier set is fine. It is roughly similar power as the old one. Trinkets is nothing kind of... There's nothing really strong there. I think that's probably true for most classes, I hope. But both Frost and Unholy, for instance, looking at lots of Del trinkets as potentially potential options here. So that could be a small disadvantage. However, overall, right... we did receive a buff. The tier set is roughly the same, so I suspect we're going to sit somewhere in the middle for raid. When it comes to Mythic Plus, we were really good in the previous patch. We saw buffs in this patch, and the tier set is fine. I suspect that we're going to be pretty damn good in the new patch. I would predict that Frost is going to be amongst the best DPS classes, at least when you compare to the previous season. I know certain classes have been buffed a lot, so it's not like Frost has been buffed in a vacuum, but still, you know, it's tanky, it deals great damage. I suspect it to be pretty good in Mythic Plus. Moving on to Unholy, we have quite a lot of buffs here to cover. We have that ability damage increased by 5%, again a flat buff to help Unholy. In the previous patch, right, Unholy was close to the bottom. Again, similar to Frost, it was brought to somewhere in the middle with this new damage buff. We also have that Soul Reaper damage increase by 35%, Close Shadows damage increase, Gertruck damage increase by 15%, Gargoyle buff by 50%. That doesn't matter, by the way, we still don't run it. Apocalypse Ghoul damage increased by 25%. This is also in conjunction with the fact that Apocalypse Ghouls now aren't stunned for 4.5 seconds when you summon them. So this is a much bigger buff than 25%. I think it's up to 40 or 50, something like that. It's a significant buff at least. Magus damage increased by 55%. That's a huge buff. Doom Bidding was nerfed to kind of counteract the fact that Magus now deals a lot of damage, but it's still a lot better than before. Commander damage buff to 45%. And then also Apocalypse Ghouls are not stunned. Same thing with Race Dead, it kind of gets going immediately. Also, Rider, all the horse guys, they have been buffed by 10%. Man, there are so many buffs here, right? Hard to kind of digest, but I think overall, what we get from this is around a 20% damage buff in pure single target. It's pretty damn huge. I'm sure you'll see that in like if you look at Sims for the current old patch, Unholy's like right at the top. It's really, really high there. And you've probably seen like clips and whatnot of Unholy just blasting in Mythic Plus, and that's generally due to this. We got a significant buff moving into this patch due to all these changes. The fact that they buffed Commander and as well as some other things here was to make essentially Rider competitive with Sun Lane in single target. We have a tier set which has a really strong synergy with Sun Lane. It focuses on death call damage during Dark Transformation, and Sun Lane gets a 70% increase on that death call damage during that Dark Transformation window. So it's like really strong synergy. So they had to do stuff like, buffing Commander, buffing Apocalypse and the Horses to make them match. And they are pretty much matched now. You can run either in pure single target. Finally, important to note is that the file has received a visual update. You will clearly notice this as soon as you put down your first one. It is now much more grey and opaque. However, they did change it so it actually goes underneath ground mechanics. So the era of having the file, cover up ground mechanics is now gone, which is a huge improvement in my opinion. I can't say I think it looks prettier, but that's my opinion. It's up to you to make your own decision there. However, what's the prediction? How's Unholy going to look like when we move into the season? Unfortunately, our new tier set is pretty terrible when you compare to the old one. Like old one was like 8% increase, new one is 4%. This means that you're not going to swap unless you get a significant eye level upgrade in a new tier set. I think Blizzard has to realize this at some point that, Unholy barely wants to upgrade the tier set pieces into a new one. So, that's not great. They're probably going to nerf the old one, but please also buff the new one because otherwise it would feel terrible. This has a bit of an effect. It means that we're going to be really strong right now, and then we're going to taper off because we're not going to scale as well with the gear because our new set isn't that powerful. Furthermore, our trinkets are not that great. We have Transmitter in the current patch. New patch doesn't really have a good alternative. They did nerf Transmitter, but before that point, Transmitter was like 1% behind our best trinket in a new patch. It's like tiny upgrade, and there's a huge eye level difference, right? This means that Unholy also doesn't scale that well with trinkets. Overall, this means that, future isn't looking that great for Unholy because we don't scale that well with gear, but the start of the patch is going to be lovely because we're going to absolutely blast through anything until everyone gets gear and we're kind of left in dust, unfortunately. Now, for Mythic Class, I see some light in the darkness. Sand Lane is a much more competitive build and is really good for cleave. This means that a historical weak part for Unholy, which was like 2, 3, 4 target cleave, now has a specific answer, and that is to run Sand Lane. This means that dungeons when you have low target counts, you run Sand Lane, you use Death Call to cleave, that's great. And then Sand Lane honestly also scales really well in big AoE. So we kind of moved from just being really good at big AoE but terrible at small cleave to being really damn good at big AoE and pretty damn decent in small cleave as well. Sand Lane builds are also going to deal more single target damage than Rider builds in Mythic Plus, so that's cool. I think generally Sand Lane is just going to see a lot more play, both for bosses where there are cleave opportunities, but also for Mythic Plus when we're going to see that power in the 2 target cleave come to play. Alright, so that's the overview. As I said, Frost I think is going to be really good for Mythic Plus given the damage buffs and everything. In Raid, I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle. Unholy is going to start out really strong but taper off due to scaling badly with gear. So probably going to be somewhere in the middle and potentially really strong in Myth Plus. We'll see. I'm not too sure there because, yeah, it's always hard to tell, especially with other classes being buffed and nerfed all over the place. So you can't really compare. Anyway, that's your 11.1 patch overview for the Frost and Unholy Death Knights. I will put out some more rotational guides, talent guides, all those kind of things. So you will learn how to actually play the specs in the new patch. Anyway, upvote, downvote, consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.